Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the cold window of the spaceship, watching as a new world slowly came into view. After 3 years of traveling through space, she was finally here. This wasn't just any planet. This was Kepler 442b, a world that might change everything humans knew about life in the universe. Elena had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl, staring up at the stars from her backyard. Now, at 35, she was one of Earth's best scientists who studied alien life. The research ship called Meridian had brought her and 40 other people to this distant world, hoping to find something amazing. As their ship landed on the planet's surface, Elena felt her heart beating fast. The air outside was breathable, and the gravity felt almost like home. Strange purple trees swayed in the wind, and the sky was a beautiful shade of green that she had never seen before. Everything looked so peaceful and magical. But the real surprise came 3 days later. Elena was collecting soil samples near a crystal-clear lake when she saw something moving in the forest. At first, she thought it might be an animal, but then a figure stepped out from behind the trees, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was clearly not human, but it looked somewhat like a person. The being stood about 7 feet tall, with skin that seemed to glow softly like moonlight. Its hair was silver and moved like liquid, flowing even when there was no wind. Most amazing of all were its eyes. They changed colors from blue to green to gold as Elena watched. The alien raised one hand in what seemed like a peaceful greeting. Elena, remembering all her training, slowly raised her own hand in response. She tried to speak, but no words came out. She was looking at the first alien being humans had ever encountered. Over the next few weeks, more aliens appeared. Elena learned they called themselves Zephyrians, and they had been watching the human ship since it landed. They seemed curious about these visitors from another world, just as Elena was curious about them. The Zephyrians brought Elena to their city, which was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Their buildings seemed to grow from the ground like giant flowers, made of a material that looked like crystal but felt warm to the touch. Gardens floated in the air, held up by some kind of technology that Elena couldn't understand. Everything was beautiful and seemed to exist in perfect harmony with nature. But the most incredible moment came when Elena met their queen. Queen Lyrale was the most magnificent being Elena had ever seen. She was taller than the other Zephyrians, with a presence that made everyone around her feel calm and safe. Her silver hair flowed down to her feet, and her eyes held the wisdom of someone who had lived for centuries. When she spoke, her voice sounded like gentle music. The queen could speak directly into Elena's mind using telepathy, which made Elena feel dizzy at first, but gradually, she got used to this strange way of talking. Lyrale was fascinated by Elena's knowledge of science and asked endless questions about Earth, its people, and how humans had learned to travel between the stars. Elena spent hours every day with the queen. Learning about Zephyrian culture, she discovered that their society was built on respect and order. Everyone had their place, and everyone knew the rules. The most important rule was that no one could touch the royal family without permission. This wasn't just a law, it was considered sacred. Anyone who broke this rule could face severe punishment. At first, this seemed strange to Elena. On Earth, people shook hands, hugged, and showed affection through touch all the time. But she began to understand that for Zephyrians, touch was something much more meaningful and powerful than it was for humans. Despite this barrier, Elena and Queen Lyrale grew closer each day. They would sit in the queen's garden for hours, talking about everything from the stars in the sky to the tiny insects that lived in the soil. The queen showed Elena how Zephyrians could make plants grow faster just by touching them, and Elena showed the queen pictures and videos of Earth on her tablet. Lyrale was especially amazed by Earth's oceans. The Zephyrians had lakes and rivers, but nothing as vast as Earth's seas. She would stare at the videos of whales swimming through blue waters, asking Elena to play them over and over again. Elena also learned that the queen was different from other Zephyrians in many ways. While most of her people were content to follow old traditions, Lyrale was curious about new ideas. She asked Elena about human democracy. about how people on Earth made decisions together instead of just following one ruler. Your people choose their leaders? The Queen asked one evening as they watched Kepler 442b's to moon's rise in the green sky. Double quotes, yes. Eleanor replied, "We believe everyone should have a voice in how they're governed." The Queen was quiet for a long time, her eyes shifting from gold to deep purple, a color Eleanor had learned. Meant she was thinking deeply about something. As the days turned into weeks, Eleanor noticed changes in the Queen. Lyrale began asking her advisors more questions about their laws and traditions. She started spending time with regular citizens, not just nobles, listening to their concerns and ideas. Some of the older Zephyrians didn't like these changes, but the Queen seemed determined to understand her people better. Eleanor also noticed that the Queen looked forward to their daily conversations. Sometimes she would find small gifts waiting for her, a beautiful flower that glowed in the dark, or a crystal that made soft music when the wind blew through it. These gifts made Eleanor's heart feel warm, though she tried not to think too much about what they might mean. The other humans on the research team were amazed by Eleanor's progress. She was learning the Zephyrian language quickly and had become the main person who helped the two species understand each other. The Zephyrians shared some of their knowledge about healing plants and clean energy, while the humans offered information about space travel and Earth's technology. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. The two species were learning from each other, and it looked like this could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship between worlds. Eleanor began to dream of a future where humans and Zephyrians worked together, exploring the galaxy and sharing their knowledge. She imagined Zephyrian scientists visiting Earth, and human students learning in the crystal cities of Kepler 442b. But late at night, when Eleanor was alone in her quarters on the ship, she sometimes felt a strange sadness she couldn't explain. There was something about Queen Lyrale, the way she looked at Eleanor, the thoughtful gifts, the long conversations, that made Eleanor feel connected to her in a way that went beyond just being a diplomat and a queen. Eleanor knew this feeling was dangerous. She was here to do a job, to help her species make contact with aliens. She couldn't let personal feelings get in the way of such an important mission. But as she fell asleep each night, she found herself looking forward to seeing the Queen again, to hearing her musical voice and watching her eyes change colors as they talked about the mysteries of the universe. Neither Eleanor nor Queen Lyrale knew that their growing friendship was being watched by others who didn't approve. Some Zephyrians whispered that their queen was spending too much time with the human visitor, and among the humans, there were those who thought Eleanor was getting too close to the aliens, forgetting that she was supposed to represent Earth's interests first. But for now, in those peaceful days of discovery and learning, Eleanor and the Queen continued their daily meetings, building a bridge between two worlds that had never known the other existed. The future seemed bright and full of possibilities, and both believed that trust and understanding could overcome any challenge. Little did they know that the greatest test of their friendship was already being planned by those who feared what their connection might mean for both of their worlds. Something felt wrong, but Eleanor couldn't put her finger on what it was. She had been on Kepler 442b for almost 4 months now, and her friendship with Queen Lyrale had grown stronger every day. But lately, she noticed strange things happening around the human camp. Colonel Thorne, the military leader of their mission, had been acting differently. He used to join the evening meetings where Eleanor shared what she learned about Zephyrian culture. Now he skipped these meetings, saying he was too busy with security matters. When Eleanor asked what kind of security problems they could have on such a peaceful planet, Thorne just gave her a cold look and walked away. Eleanor also noticed that some of the soldiers were asking weird questions. Yesterday, Lieutenant Rodriguez had cornered her near the supply tent and asked how many Zephyrians lived in the capital city. When Eleanor asked why he needed to know, he mumbled something about just curious and hurried away. The communication officer, Captain Williams, seemed nervous whenever Eleanor was around. She caught him quickly closing computer screens when she entered the communications room. When she asked about messages from Earth, he told her that everything was classified and she didn't need to worry about it. But the strangest thing was what Elena found in her quarters one morning. Someone had gone through her research notes. They were still there, but not in the same order she had left them. Her detailed reports about Zephyrian technology and their defensive capabilities were missing 3 pages. When she asked around, everyone claimed they hadn't seen anything. Helena tried to talk to Dr. Peterson, the mission's lead scientist and her closest friend on the team. But even Peterson seemed distant now. He told her that some people back on Earth were worried about her getting too involved with the aliens. What does that mean? Elena asked. Peterson looked around nervously before answering. Some folks think you're forgetting that you're human first, scientist second. This confused Elena. Wasn't the whole point of their mission to build good relationships with the Zephyrians? How could doing her job well be a bad thing? Meanwhile, her daily meetings with Queen Lyrale were becoming more meaningful than ever. The Queen had started sharing deeper thoughts about her world and her people. She told Elena about the pressure she felt to always make perfect decisions, and how lonely it could be to be responsible for an entire civilization. Sometimes I wish I could just be normal, Lyrale said one afternoon as they walked through her floating garden. I would like to touch a flower without everyone watching to see if I do it the royal way. I would like to laugh too loudly sometimes, or ask silly questions without my advisors writing down everything I say. Elena understood this feeling, even though she wasn't a queen. She knew what it was like to always be on duty, always representing something bigger than herself. The Queen also began sharing her special gift with Elena, her visions. Zephyrian royalty could sometimes see glimpses of possible futures. These visions weren't always clear, and they didn't always come true, but they often contained important warnings. I have been having troubled dreams, the Queen told Elena one evening. Her eyes had turned dark red, which Elena had learned meant she was worried or scared. I see fire and shouting. I see you crying, and I see blood on my hands. Elena tried to comfort her. Dreams can be confusing. Maybe it's just your mind processing all the changes happening between our peoples. But the Queen shook her head. These are not regular dreams. They feel real, like memories of something that hasn't happened yet. Elena didn't really believe in psychic abilities, but she could see that these visions were truly frightening the Queen. She wished she knew how to help. The Zephyrian court was also changing in ways that worried Elena. Some of the older nobles had started treating her coldly. Lord Zentari, the Queen's chief advisor, no longer smiled when Elena entered the throne room. She overheard whispered conversations that stopped when she came near. One day, while Elena was waiting to meet with the Queen, she heard the Zephyrian guards talking in their own language. Elena had learned enough Zephyrian by now to understand most of what they said. The Queen spends too much time with the human, one guard said. It makes her look weak. The other replied, a queen should keep distance from outsiders, some say. She cares more about the humans' opinions than about our traditions. Elena felt her heart sink. She never wanted to cause problems for Queen Lyrale. The last thing she wanted was for her friendship with the Queen to damage Lyrale's relationship with her own people. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She walked outside the human camp and looked up at the green sky filled with unfamiliar stars. Everything had seemed so hopeful when they first arrived. Now she felt like she was standing on ice that might crack at any moment. Back on Earth, things Elena didn't know about were happening in government meeting rooms. Politicians and military leaders were looking at Elena's reports about Zephyrian technology and seeing opportunities that Elena never intended. The Zephyrians had clean energy that could solve Earth's pollution problems. They had medical knowledge that could cure diseases. They had materials that could make space travel much easier. Some Earth leaders thought it would be better to take these things rather than ask for them politely. They worried that if they waited too long, the Zephyrians might decide they didn't want to share their secrets with humans after all. Colonel Thorne was receiving secret orders that Elena never saw. He was told to gather information about Zephyrian weaknesses and to prepare for alternative actions if peaceful negotiations didn't work out the way Earth wanted. Thorne didn't like Elena's approach. He thought she was being naive, trusting the aliens too much. In his experience, if you wanted something, you took it. You didn't sit around having tea parties and hoping the other side would be generous. He began making his own plans. The day that changed everything started like any other day. Queen Lyrale had planned a special ceremony to celebrate the growing friendship between humans and Zephyrians. She wanted to show her people that the humans were trustworthy allies who could help make their world better. Elena woke up feeling excited. She had been working with the Queen for weeks to plan this event. There would be traditional Zephyrian music, displays of their beautiful art, and demonstrations of both human and alien technology. It was supposed to be a symbol of cooperation between their two species. She put on her best formal clothes, a simple but elegant blue dress that the Queen had told her looked beautiful with her dark hair. Elena looked at herself in the mirror and smiled. Today felt like the beginning of something wonderful. The ceremony was held in the Great Plaza, a massive open space in the center of the Zephyrian capital city. Hundreds of Zephyrians gathered, their luminescent skin creating a soft, magical glow in the afternoon light. Elena had never seen so many of them together at once. Their musical voices created a gentle hum of conversation that sounded almost like singing. The human team was there too, looking uncomfortable in their formal military uniforms. Elena noticed that Colonel Thorne kept checking his watch and whispering to his officers. She hoped he wasn't planning to leave early. This ceremony was important for building trust. Queen Lyrale looked magnificent. She wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight, and her silver hair was arranged in an elaborate style that made her look even taller than usual. When she began speaking to the crowd, her voice carried clearly across the plaza without any need for amplification. Today we celebrate not just friendship between our peoples, the Queen said, but the beginning of a new age. An age where different worlds can work together, learn from each other, and create something more beautiful than either could achieve alone. The crowd responded with a harmonious humming sound that made Elena's skin tingle with goosebumps. This was what she had dreamed of when she first became a scientist, bringing different peoples together for the good of everyone. Elena was supposed to speak next, representing humanity. She had prepared careful words about cooperation and mutual respect. But as she walked toward the speaking platform, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Colonel Thorne and his soldiers were spreading out around the plaza. They were trying to look casual, but Elena could see they were positioning themselves strategically. Some had their hands near their weapons. Elena's mind raced. This was supposed to be a peaceful ceremony. Why were the soldiers acting like they expected trouble? She tried to catch Thorne's eye, but he was focused on his men, giving them small hand signals that Elena didn't understand. A terrible feeling grew in her stomach. Then she remembered Queen Lyrale's visions, fire and shouting, crying and blood. Elena abandoned her planned speech and ran toward the Queen instead. "Your Majesty," she called out urgently, "something's wrong. We need to get everyone to safety." But it was too late. Colonel Thorne raised his hand, and suddenly the plaza erupted into chaos. Human soldiers who Elena had trusted, people she had eaten meals with and shared jokes with, began pointing weapons at the peaceful Zephyrians. "Nobody move," Thorne shouted. "By order of Earth Command, you are all under military control." The Zephyrians were completely shocked. They had never experienced violence like this. Their society was built on peace and cooperation. They didn't even have weapons of their own. Elena watched in horror as her own species, the people she had been so proud to represent, began terrorizing the gentle beings who had welcomed them with open arms. Queen Lyrale stood frozen on the platform, her eyes cycling rapidly through colors Elena had never seen before, from silver to deep purple to bright orange. The Queen was experiencing every emotion at once: confusion, fear, anger, and heartbreak. "Stop this," Elena screamed, running toward Thorne. "These people are our friends. What are you doing?" But Thorne pushed her away. "Stand down. Dr. Vasquez, you've forgotten which planet you're from." The Zephyrians began to panic. Some tried to run, but the soldiers had surrounded the plaza. Others huddled together, their skin flickering with distress signals that Elena had learned meant extreme fear. Then the worst thing happened. A young Zephyrian, probably just trying to protect his family, reached toward a soldier's weapon to push it away. The soldier, thinking he was being attacked, fired. The energy blast hit Queen Lyrale instead. Elena watched in horror as the most beautiful, wise, and kind being she had ever known collapsed to the ground. Her starlight robes now stained with glowing blue blood. "No," Elena screamed, and ran toward the fallen queen. But the Zephyrian guards, finally understanding that they were under attack, activated their own defenses. Energy barriers sprang up around the plaza, and return fire began coming from defensive positions Elena hadn't even known existed. In the chaos, Elena was caught between the two sides. A Zephyrian energy blast meant for the human soldiers caught her in the shoulder, spinning her round and sending her crashing to the ground just a few feet from where Queen Lyrale lay bleeding. Elena crawled across the stone plaza, ignoring the pain in her shoulder and the sounds of battle around her. All she could think about was reaching the queen, helping her somehow, making sure she was okay. When she finally reached Lyrale's side, the queen's eyes were still changing colors, but now they were fading from bright gold to pale gray. Elena could see that she was badly hurt. "Your Majesty," Elena whispered, reaching out instinctively to touch the queen's face, to offer whatever comfort she could. But Queen Lyrale, even in her pain, turned away from Elena's touch. Her voice was barely a whisper, but Elena could hear every word clearly. "You are forbidden to touch me, human." The words hit Elena harder than the energy blast had. They carried centuries of law, the weight of betrayal, and the death of everything Elena had hoped to build between their worlds. Elena knelt there in the chaos, her hand still reaching towards someone she could never touch, watching the light fade from the eyes of the most important person in her life. Someone who now saw her as just another human invader, no different from the soldiers who had destroyed everything. Elena sat in a small, windowless room made of the same crystal material as the rest of the Zephyrian city. But this crystal was different. It was darker, colder, and it seemed to absorb light instead of giving it off. She had been here for 6 weeks now, waiting for her trial. Her shoulder had healed from the energy blast, but her heart felt like it would never be whole again. Every night, she replayed that terrible moment when Queen Lyrale had looked at her with such pain and disappointment, speaking those words that still echoed in Elena's mind. "You are forbidden to touch me, human." The Zephyrian guards brought her simple meals twice a day, but they never spoke to her. They looked at her like she was something dangerous, something that might explode at any moment. Elena couldn't blame them in their eyes. She was part of the group that had attacked their peaceful ceremony and hurt their beloved queen. Elena had tried to explain what really happened. She told anyone who would listen that she had tried to warn everyone, that she had no idea about Colonel Thorne's plan. But her words felt empty even to herself. She was human, and humans had betrayed them. That was all that mattered now. Dr. Peterson was allowed to visit her once. He looked older than when Elena had last seen him, with new lines around his eyes, and gray streaks in his hair that hadn't been there before. "How is she?" Elena asked immediately. She didn't need to explain who she meant. Peterson sighed heavily. "Queen Lyrale is recovering physically. The medical team says she'll be fine." But he paused, struggling to find the right words. "She's changed, Elena. She doesn't see anyone anymore. Not even her closest advisors unless it's absolutely necessary. She spends most of her time alone in her private chambers." Elena felt her heart break a little more. The queen she remembered had been so curious about everything, so eager to learn and share ideas. The thought of her hiding away from the world was almost unbearable. "The other humans?" Elena asked. "Most of them were sent back to Earth immediately after the attack," Peterson said. "Colonel Thorne is facing a military court back home. The politicians are blaming each other for what happened. Some say Thorne acted without orders. Others say he was just following secret instructions." Elena laughed bitterly. "Does it matter? The damage is done." Peterson reached through the crystal bars that separated them. "Elena, there's something else. Your family has been trying to send you messages. Your mother, your sister, they're all worried sick about you." Elena thought about her family back on Earth, her mother, who had supported her dream of becoming a scientist even when it meant Elena would spend years away from home, her younger sister, who used to ask endless questions about space and aliens. What would they think when they learned what had happened? Would they be proud of her for trying to do the right thing, or ashamed that she had failed so completely? "Tell them I'm okay," Elena said quietly. "Tell them I did my best." After Peterson left, Elena was alone again with her thoughts and memories. She remembered every conversation she'd had with Queen Lyrale, every moment they had shared learning about each other's worlds. The Queen had been so hopeful about the future, so excited about the possibilities of cooperation between their species. Elena remembered one particular evening, when they had been discussing Earth's history. The Queen had asked about wars and conflicts, unable to understand why humans would fight each other. "Your people have so much diversity," the Queen had said, her eyes shining with curiosity. "Different cultures, different ideas, different ways of seeing the world. This should make you stronger, not weaker." Elena had tried to explain about resources and territory and ideology, but the Queen had just looked sad. Perhaps she had said, "Your people need to learn what we learned long ago, that cooperation creates more abundance than competition ever could." Now Elena wondered if Queen Lyrale thought all humans were incapable of real cooperation. The attack had probably confirmed her worst fears about Elena's species on Earth. The news of the failed mission had caused huge political problems. Elena learned about this from the few updates she was allowed to receive. The president who had authorized the mission was facing calls for resignation. The military leaders who had secretly planned the attack were being investigated. Peace protesters filled the streets of major cities, holding signs that said things like "We are better than this" and apologized to the aliens. But there were also people who supported what Colonel Thorne had done. They believed humans should take what they needed from other worlds, not ask politely for it. These people thought Elena was a traitor for siding with aliens over her own species. Elena felt caught between two worlds that no longer had room for her. The worst part was the silence from Queen Lyrale. Elena had written dozens of letters, trying to explain her feelings and apologize for what her people had done. But none of the letters had been answered. Elena didn't even know if the Queen had read them. Sometimes Elena lay awake at night, staring at the crystal ceiling of her cell, and wondered what might have been if Colonel Thorne hadn't attacked. If the two species had continued building trust, where might it have led? She imagined Queen Lyrale visiting Earth, seeing the ocean she had been so fascinated by. She imagined human children learning in Zephyrian schools, and Zephyrian scientists helping to heal Earth's damaged environment. All of those possibilities had died in that plaza, along with something precious that Elena couldn't even name. The day of Elena's final trial arrived on a morning when Kepler 442b's to moons were still visible in the green sky. Elena had been preparing for this moment for months, but she still felt nervous as the guards escorted her to the Great Hall of Justice. The hall was enormous, with crystal walls that rose up so high Elena couldn't see the ceiling. Hundreds of Zephyrians filled the space, their soft glowing skin creating a beautiful but intimidating light. Elena had never seen so many of them in one place, all watching her with expressions she couldn't read. At the front of the hall sat a panel of 12 Zephyrian judges, their robes indicating they were among the most respected members of their society. And in the center, on a throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal, sat Queen Lyrale. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen the Queen since that terrible day. In the plaza, Lyrale looked as beautiful as ever. But something fundamental had changed. Her eyes, which used to shift colors constantly with her emotions, now remained a steady, cold silver. Her face showed no expression at all. The Queen bore a visible scar on her left arm where the energy blast had hit her, a thin line of darker skin that would probably remain for the rest of her very long life. It was a permanent reminder of the day humans had brought violence to her peaceful world. The trial began with the charges being read. Elena was accused of being part of a conspiracy to attack the Zephyrian people and steal their technology. She was also charged with violating their sacred laws about diplomatic conduct. Elena listened to the translator convert the formal Zephyrian legal language into English, but her attention kept drifting to Queen Lyrale. The queen sat perfectly still, looking straight ahead, never once meeting Elena's eyes. When Elena was finally allowed to speak in her own defense, she stood up slowly. She had prepared a careful speech about law and evidence and reasonable doubt. But looking at Queen Lyrale's cold, distant expression, Elena realized that legal arguments wouldn't matter here. This wasn't really about guilt or innocence. This was about trust that had been broken and a friendship that had been destroyed. Elena set aside her prepared notes and spoke from her heart instead. "Your Majesty," she began, and for just a moment, the Queen's eyes flickered toward her. "I know that nothing I say can undo what happened. I know that my people brought violence to your world, and I know that you have every right to hate us for it." The hall was completely silent. Even the soft humming sound that Zephyrians usually made when they gathered had stopped. "I won't stand here and make excuses," Elena continued. "I won't tell you that Colonel Thorne acted alone, or that most humans are different from him. You have no reason to believe anything I say about my species anymore." Queen Lyrale's expression remained unchanged, but Elena thought she saw the slightest tightening around her eyes. "But I want you to know that the time I spent with you, learning about your people and your world, was the most meaningful experience of my life. You showed me what it means to lead with wisdom and compassion. You taught me that different doesn't mean dangerous, and that cooperation is always better than conquest." Elena's voice began to shake, but she pressed on. "I failed to see the signs of what Colonel Thorne was planning. I failed to protect you and your people when you needed protection. I failed as a diplomat, as a scientist, and as a friend now." Elena was speaking directly to the Queen, ignoring everyone else in the hall. "I know I can never touch you again. I know that the laws of your people and the actions of mine have made that impossible. But I want you to know that I will carry the memory of our friendship with me for the rest of my life. You made me a better person, and I'm sorry that I couldn't do the same for my own species." Elena sat down, feeling emotionally drained. She had said everything she needed to say. The judges talked among themselves in quiet voices for what felt like hours. Elena could see Queen Lyrale listening to their discussions, occasionally nodding or asking questions, but the Queen's face remained an unreadable mask. Finally, the lead judge stood up to announce the verdict. Elena had been found guilty of failing to prevent the attack, but not guilty of planning it. Instead of the death penalty that she had been expecting, she was sentenced to permanent exile from Zephyrian space. Elena felt relief and sadness at the same time. She would live, but she would never see this beautiful world again. But then, something unexpected happened. Queen Lyrale stood up and asked to address the court. This was unusual. The Queen didn't normally speak at trials. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," the Queen said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "you have been sentenced to exile, and this sentence will stand. But before you leave our world forever, I have something for you." A guard approached Elena carrying a small device that looked like a crystal flower. When Elena touched it, it began to glow softly. "This contains recordings of our conversations," the Queen explained. "Our discussions about science, about the stars, about the possibilities we once imagined. Perhaps your people will learn from what we almost achieved together." Elena felt tears running down her face as she held the crystal device. It was more than just a gift. It was proof that their friendship had meant something, even if it could never be restored. "I hope," Queen Lyrale said, her voice softer now, "that someday your species will be ready to try again. When that day comes, we will remember that not all humans are the same." Elena was escorted back to the human ship that would take her home to Earth. As Kepler-442b grew smaller in the window behind her, she held the crystal device close to her heart and made a promise. She would spend the rest of her life making sure that humanity never repeated Colonel Thorne's mistakes. She would train new diplomats, teach them about respect and understanding. She would tell the story of Queen Lyrale and the Zephyrians to anyone who would listen. And maybe, if she worked hard enough and lived long enough, she would help prepare humanity for the day when they might be worthy of a second chance. Back on Kepler 440b, Queen Lyrali stood alone in her garden, looking up at the stars. For the first time since the attack, her eyes shifted from silver to a deep, hopeful blue. Somewhere among those stars, Elena was carrying their shared memories back to Earth, perhaps. The Queen thought love and understanding really could survive even the worst betrayals. Perhaps there was still hope for both their worlds, the crystal. Flowers in her garden began to glow a little brighter, as if they, too, believed in the possibility of forgiveness and new beginnings.